I think Bill Traylor is probably the greatest artist you've never heard of, but he's getting heard of more and more.
Traylor's an inspired visualist. That's the only way you arrive at work. It's that distinct, that esoteric, that visually elegant and refined.
Bill Traylor lived his life between two radically different worlds, rural and urban, old and new, black and white.
He is engaging with issues around class, how we behave and how we treat one another, sometimes good and sometimes not so good.
I see a very animated, agitated, violent, mystical realm.
Bill Traylor was born into slavery in 1853 near Pleasant Hill, just outside Benton, Alabama.
In the last years of his life, he lived in the city of Montgomery.
One of the things that people talk about when you go to a New York City is a city that never sleeps. That's the way they talked about Monroe Street.
He was witness to the rise of an African-American culture.
The transcendent surprise is that all the while, he was nurturing a remarkable creative gift that would not be expressed for decades.
There, he took it upon himself to pick up a pencil and paintbrush and put down the story of his life in the way that he could in pictures.
I could place his work next to anyone, and he would still stand out. When I see Bill Traylor's work, I see this yearning for a place that's beyond here. It's a place that's not tangible.
All right. How are you? How are you, Sam? How are you, Jeffrey?
I'm good.
I'm good. Thanks. Thanks for asking. How about
Very
you?
good. Very good. Thank you. I was grateful for the opportunity to see the documentary and to really honestly to learn about Bill Traylor. You know, what is nice is now we'll be hopefully introduce him to a whole new audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's start talking about what a unique way in he had, right? This is a guy who was born into slavery. Fortunately, at I guess optimally towards the end of that time. But he started. I guess he was a slave for a while, and then he worked the land under contract to the same slave owning family, and he eventually went off to Montgomery, Alabama. This all took place in Alabama. And then he later in life, he became homeless and started in his 80s.
Right, correct.
Drawing, right? And so he had no training at all. This was just, right? And he, so I see in the earliest stages somewhat crude, childlike drawings, but at some point he finds a voice there, and then, yeah, go ahead, interrupt me anytime.
I was just going to say that, I mean, what you're bringing up is like, what's that transcendent moment where he's putting together his ancestry and his history and his memories, and all of a sudden, like, they click in 1939, and for 3 years he pours out these amazing drawings sitting on a street corner. That's the amazing phenomena, is like, how that happens. How does that happen exactly? And that's one of the mysteries we don't solve.
Right.
But also, I mean, I fell in love with his work almost 40 years ago when I saw it for the first time. And it stayed with me. And, but in order to tell a story about an artist, you kind of want to have that B story. And so I kind of came up with this idea with my friend Fred, who helped me write it. He did most of the writing, but this idea of like showing what Traylor's purview was, what he may have been seeing, and trying to line up the music and the images and the narratives that we chose to kind of go with, possibly what his experience was. And it's not a perfect life either. he had a lot of, he was a, he was baldy, I mean, he was out there as a person. So, I think what people are responding to is that it's a full life, that we're not just showing the banner things, we're showing everything about his life. And
Yeah. Okay. Did you?
think-
Go ahead, please,
I was
Sam.
going to say one of the things I think that Jeff does really well in shaping this film is he's looking at a man who, was homeless, who lived on the streets of Montgomery, Alabama, but Jeff was able to see that this man created a fantastic, beautiful visual language that makes him stand out, far above other artists, around that time. So I think that, for me, when Jeff first showed me a rough cut a long time ago, before I got involved as an EP, I could see, to me, what's important about making films about artists like this is that the director has to have a real strong perspective and point of view, which I think that Jeff has, and that he brought to the material, and the way he shaped it, the way he had the narrator help tell the story, the use of dance and the silhouettes that he created with his team. So to me, I didn't know as much about Traylor as Jeff did before he introduced me to him, but it just opened my eyes to how important some of these artists, who some people consider outsiders, really are creating work that is so now and so present, and it's sort of how evocative it is.
Well, he's an outsider artist because he's not, he didn't go through the ranks and the whole sort of built-in infrastructure that exists for the majority of artists. But he's also an outsider in the sense that there's no purer way to become an artist than discovering this whole thing on your own and just developing a voice, an artistic or language of your own. You can't in any way even suggest that he was, or know if he was influenced by anything other than his own experiences.
well, yeah, it's also it's a history that we didn't, the situation he was in, the official history wasn't very well kept either. And so that word outsider is such a tricky thing to him. He probably wasn't an outsider. He just did what he did. As Radcliffe says, he just did what he did when he did it. So that word is such a tricky, it's actually a phrase that kind of came up around African Americans. I mean, I first saw his work at a show called Black Folk Art in America in 1930 to 1980.
At the Corcoran. That's the show that was at the Corcoran.
Right. And, we didn't have a word for art brut in America, so they used this word outsider. But it tended to be directed towards Southern African American artists at the time. So, I mean, we've gone in this 40 years since, we've gone through quite a journey with it. It's known as outsider art, so that's kind of the brand at this point. But, I think one of the goals here is to as artists, I mean, Sam just did an amazing movie about 20th century contemporary artists. And a lot of those artists would tell you they don't go into an art store to buy their supplies anymore. It's like, it's found materials and it's much more an organic thing, which is what Traylor was doing from the very beginning. So, it's. So
he found his supplies. I mean, he just drew with whatever, I guess, pencils or writing implements he had handy.
He was often given paints. People would come by and give him paints
and donate them.
But a lot of the, there's a drugstore next door called Dean's Drugs that whenever they would throw out the posters or their candy boxes that things were delivered in, he would abscond with them. If you look on the back of many of these drawings, there's Baby Ruth cartons and, that kind of material. So
well, one of his great grandchildren, wasn't it, just said that when she was little and she came across a bunch of these drawings in a closet or something that she just sort of drew on the back, and you thought it was scratch paper, to use her words, right? Like, because it was on what was kind of scratch paper. It wasn't like on a canvas. It wasn't on a, these weren't framed,
No,
Well,
they were often tacked onto the wall with a nail or a piece of string
yeah.
or whatever. Yeah.
Um,
I bet she wishes she had some of those now.
That she does.
well, yeah. I mean, this is what the film is kind of about too, about the legacy, his legacy, and the family. You interview a large number, I would say, of his, surviving family, his great grandchildren, some grandchildren that are still around.
We found 6 great grandchildren. We had to dig them up. I mean, it was not.
Don't say that. But
I mean,
you
it
seek
wasn't.
them out. Yeah.
We didn't have to dig them out of the grave, but we
Well,
had to.
okay.
We had to go looking for them, and we found an actual granddaughter, and I happened to find footage that was taken of her 20 or 30 years before, so I was able to put those 2 worlds together. But the other thing is materials didn't hang around as much as they do today. We don't have drives that we're saving things on. Just finding that historical material is kind of difficult. Like Kerry James Marshall had a phrase that he calls the vacuum of images, and that kind of means that a lot of the things that we would reference from that period got destroyed or don't exist. And the same kind of thing with absence of ruin. If you go to Montgomery 10, 15 years ago, it doesn't look anything like it did in 1960. It was completely a ghost town. And so if you don't have those things to remember anymore, it's hard to keep that identity of a place. But Traylor somehow, he was there when it was a thriving community. So, a lot of people say a lot of those images are referencing, I talk about it in the movie a bit, but it was one of the first things. It's referencing some of the built-in environments of Montgomery, the fountain, the state house, the clock that's in the center of town, that he was actually using those as some sort of a reference for himself.
Sam, you said you came in, you saw a rough cut?
Yeah.
And
I know Jeff quite a long time, both, so
okay.
we were editing colleagues and we both made this transition to directors. So, in the last
right, you're both editor. You both come from an editing background, correct?
Yeah, we're both editors. So we've known each other quite a long time, but in the last 5 or 6 years, we've become pretty tight. And so when he had showed me one of his early rough cuts, I was enthralled. I was intrigued by Bill Traylor and the arc of his journey. And so, I kept watching cuts and it was getting better and better. And then Jeff asked me to come on as an executive producer, and I couldn't say no. I mean, he's a brother in arms as far as I'm concerned. And so, and he's doing something that's important, telling a story about this artist that people were never aware of. And I'm glad that now there's an opportunity for an audience to see it when it premieres at the Film Forum and online. And, I'm glad people are getting a chance to know who Traylor was. I spent a lot of time in Montgomery myself, because my son went to Tuskegee. So, I'm sort of connected to that city also. And I'm even more connected now with Jeff's film. So, this is sort of a nice sort of synergy.
Well, also with MLK, I spent a lot of time in Montgomery visiting MLK locations, and in the parsonage house and getting tours, and so there's all this kind of crossover. And also, Sam and I we literally started around the same time. I was in more feature films at the time. He was a little, sort of going back and forth between documentaries and feature. So we've had this interesting dialogue back and forth about those kinds of things. So, and I mean, this film, I don't know. I mean, you'd be the judge of whether it was a typical documentary, but I kind of came at it from a narrative point of view, I guess.
Well, I will say one thing that kind of stood out in my mind now that you bring it up. Like, for instance, I kept hearing voices and what sounded like voiceover narration, but it turned out it wasn't. It was they were sitting looking at the camera, talking directly to the camera. I mean, we have the talking heads, but there was a different thing going on here. It's like people. I mean, I don't know. I just feel like they were almost characters in there.
Very good. You're one of the few people to mention that, because I wanted them to be I wanted them to be the drawings. I wanted them to be the narrator. I wanted them to be performers. I wanted, if you notice, they're kind of dressed casually, kind of on a rehearsal stage. I wanted the feeling of kind of an impromptu vibe, and because you don't want to take. I mean, it's serious stuff on one hand, but he also had such a sense of humor about him, and there's so much that we don't know that we kind of just want to leave it loose so that there are ways that people could kind of grab onto whatever they could relate to, you know.
Yeah. Did you say there's he had a sense of humor? Do you derive that from his work?
Oh,
or
definitely.
Anecdotally?
Not from him personally.
No, well, I know that.
Yeah. No, I think the work has a great sense of humor to it. A man kicking a woman in the back with his foot. There's just sort of the way the characters are situated at times.
Yeah.
I think he's being, I don't know if whimsical is the right word, but I think he's seeing the world in kind of a obtuse way.
Yeah,
it's kind of a topsy-turvy kind of world for him.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, you just don't think of, from the few photographs, you just figure, oh, he's had such a tough time of it. He probably lost his sense of humor, but it's interesting to kind of find other ways of maybe, understanding him.
Yeah, there's so few photographs and no recorded audio. So we started digging deep into the drawings, and many times when it's a man holding a pipe or somebody on crutches, we figure that's him, and he's commenting on what he's doing within that scene.
Talk about
sometimes he's got his fists up and he's ready to fight, and other times he's kind of barely getting by. So
he was sort of right. He was discovered. I mean, he while he was working, making his art, right? This guy Charles Shannon, of course, and and then eventually got him an exhibit. Can you talk a little bit about that part of the film? I mean, we can leave a lot of it. We don't have to go into much.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's only complicated in the sense that there was a movement in Montgomery around 1939 that was a group of kind of liberal-minded Southerners who started something called the New South. That was kind of an answer to the Harlem Renaissance. And they had discovered Traylor, and they gave him a show in the New South for, just of the work, not framed or anything, just up on the wall. And they didn't charge any money. They didn't sell the work. It was just a display. And that was up for about a month. And some people say Traylor came to see it, and it was kind of out of context for him. He couldn't relate to it. But the New South had a lot of internal problems and kind of broke up after a year. But so they didn't exist anymore. So Shannon kind of held on to the idea of Traylor for quite a few years. Then he finally, without getting much traction, he finally put the work away around 1959, 1960, and only brought it out again in the early to mid 80s. When, I mean, if you want great detail, there was a Horace Pippin show that he read about Shannon. So he called the gallerist who showed the Pippin material and asked that gallerist whether she wanted to show the work, and she did not, but two of the people who worked at the gallery became like his main dealers. And now it's all secondary market, right? It's all out, whatever that we know that exists, like 1,200 to 1,500 pieces, all are in collections or museums. It's not something that you're going to find in a flea market or an antique store too easily at this point.
Who holds the deed on this stuff? Who owns it?
The copyright, you mean?
Yeah.
It was done so long ago. It's kind of complicated. I don't think you really want to go into that.
No, that's a separate documentary just that Sam can make tonight.
But there was a settlement, as it was mentioned in the film, there was a settlement where family members wanted some work, and they got 15 or 18 pieces in a settlement.
Sam mentioned it was going to be at the Film Forum. It opens. The name of the film again is Bill Traylor Chasing Ghosts. Excuse me, Bill Traylor Chasing Ghosts.
Right.
It's opening Friday, the 16th of April, in theaters, including Film Forum and LA at the Lemley NoHo 7. And it will also be available virtually um, uh, across the US. I guess
On the Kino Marquee
Kino Marquee platform.
Yes. It's a little complicated about that as people go, well, I look at the list and there's nothing near me.
Right.
But I think the way Kino Marquee works is you can pick any theater that you want to support. And
that's a beautiful thing. That's why we love Kino Lorber. They got it right. You know, that's why I like whenever a film like this comes across, it's always a pleasure. I know David's on, so I can say these things. I know he's probably smiling. Anyway, also, wait, was there any local or Montgomery or Alabama screenings, or did his kin get a chance to see it ahead of?
Yeah, we premiered the film in Montgomery, and last year we actually got the city of Montgomery to put up a historical marker on the corner of North Lawrence and Monroe Street, which is where he used to work, where there's a parking
marker,
garage, right?
And there's also there is it sounds like it's an historical.
Yeah, that's a historical marker. But we did in the movie, we did photograph he had been buried in an unmarked grave, and we had a ceremony that we put a gravestone up.
This is a almost perfect. It's wrong, but it's almost perfect that he's in an unmarked grave somewhere, because it's like, this is the guy's life. I mean, from the beginning to, it's just like people tried to push him completely out of the world on some level, and yet because whatever it was, who knows, this incredible gene or something that he had, he was able to make this beautiful expression of art, and it survives him. And now you guys are telling this story, which is so important, because the universe has tried to push this guy away many times and kill him off. And, but thanks to this film, that won't happen. So.
Well, and there are other people, I don't know if there's other people like him, but there are other stories.
Right.
That
probably many like him.
Yeah, you want to give people a chance to tell their stories. And I think that, that's what I got very vested in, the possibility of keeping him from disappearing. While the work is important, I think the individual's life is important. And remember, I'm not sure where you grew up, but where I grew up, it wasn't part of the education. We heard banner things. It was like Reconstruction and Jim Crow, and but we never learned about the things that came in between. So that was a very strong education. And also, I've been talking a little bit about this, but we have to get the people who make these, who finance these movies a little more involved in the idea that these are good stories to tell. I mean, we got very lucky with Kino Lorber and Film Forum. They have a certain amount of power behind them, but without them, we'd be sort of dangling around. So
yeah, I'm sure Sam has something to say on the subject, because he's probably always balancing that very issue in the work he does, like trying to tell stories like the Bill Traylor story, but also trying to tell a commercial story, because he gets his films on HBO and on, Netflix.
I think what Jeff's saying is very important to those. It's important for the Kino Lobers and the IFCs and all these distribution companies and production companies to realize that these are these fantastic and phenomenal untold stories, like the story of Bill Traylor, that needs to be out there to the public. Because Jeff's absolutely right. I mean, the education that we have all gotten misses the point that there's these really important stories about people and men and women who did phenomenal things, and no one knows about them. So anytime you have the opportunity to shape a documentary about someone like Bill Traylor, that should be, an opening to say there are other stories about people like him, be it in the arts, be it in, the visual arts, be it in literature, be it in film, whose stories need to be told. You know.
Well said. Oh, and there's a note from Kino Lorber saying, if you watch on Kino, if you can, obviously you guys said you can choose the art house that's associated with, who says sign on to the Kino Marquee platform, and half of the ticket sales goes to the art house. So it's important. So you're supporting independent film, you're supporting documentary, you're supporting art house. So just buying a ticket to this film is like obviously really important.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm happy, you know, without I think the idea of art itself and creation, and you know, the last 4 or 5 years we haven't gotten much of that. We haven't got much support from the top in that.
No.
And I think that we're at a point where we, you know, we need to smarten up and get some more culture into our society.
Well, the empirical data is there. They say, you know, people are smarter when there's art, and other countries seem to make it more of a priority. This country just has failed terribly in that regard. You know, I'd be the first to, yeah, I agree with you 100%. Well, you know, thank you guys.
My pleasure.
You know, Sam, thank you again. It's I'll probably see you soon again for another project, I hope. And
you probably will.
Yeah, odds are good. So
But make sure everybody tells everybody on your podcast to go and see this film about chasing.
You know I will.
Bill Traylor chasing ghosts.
And to tell your friends, if you like it, tell your friends. And you know, I think that the trailer kind of sells it pretty well. You know, I think if people just give it the 2 minutes to watch the trailer.
Well, like I said, we're going to put it at the beginning of this.
Great.
So we'll force people to sit through the trailer. Not that they'll mind it. You know, it's a great trailer.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about the music. I mean, there's a ton of really interesting, good music.
Sure. And also you got tap dancing in this film. Which is a form of jazz.
Right.
One could argue.
A form of jazz. Adam, it is jazz.
It is jazz. Corrected on my podcast once again. It's jazz.
It's jazz.
What about the music you were mentioning? You wanted to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, I think that, you know, in my films, I tend to, because I'm worried, I don't want people to feel that it's like academic or preachy, you know, so I try to give something for everybody. I try to make some nice visuals and some good music and you know, some things that you may not have seen before. I was so psyched when I found that footage from 1941 of Montgomery. I mean, I showed that footage to a historian in Montgomery, and she had never seen it before, and she wasn't old enough to know what that looked like.
Where'd you find that?
It was actually I found it in the NYU library, but it was then I kind of did research to find the original, but it was a very well-known photographer named Rudy Burkhart, and he had been stationed in Alabama during World War II, and he was out with his camera one day, and he just went out and shot the footage, you know. And the other, there's a lot of material in there from the early days, 1890s, from Dallas County, of a woman photographer named Mary Ellen Kepp, who, all those are glass negative photographs, literally shot maybe even on the same land the Traylor lived on. I mean, those were like phenomenal things to dig up, and you know, it kept giving me more and more confidence that the movie could be made, because you know, I had interesting things to show to people. So
thank you again. Bill Traylor, Chasing Ghosts, at the Film Forum in New York, or at the Lemley NoHo 7 in LA, and on the Kino Marquee platform. Thank you guys. And
thank you.
Thanks so much, Adam.
Thank you.
Be good, Adam. Say hello to your son.
I will. Thank you. And your daughter.
Thanks, man.
Plural.
Bye.
All right. Take care.
You too. Thank you.